and thank you for joining our teaching for the 21st Century webinar brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang. I'm your host, Annie Cyrus. If you're joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A box you see on your screen if you have any questions. If you are with us on Facebook, please feel free to use the comments section if you have any questions, and I promise we will get to answer them as soon as our very special guest presentation is over. With that being said, it is always my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Jason Hill. He's a professor of philosophy at DePaul University in Chicago. He's also a Shellman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and his newest book is just out, What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Hello, Jason.
Hey, Annie, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I know you have a lot of important topics to discuss, but before we go there, would you please quickly tell us a little bit about your book and where can we get it?
Well, the book just came out yesterday, and you can order it on Amazon, or I think it's in Barnes & Noble, and it's What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Racial Justice in the Age of Post-Oppression. And in a nutshell, I wanted to put an end to a lot of the pathogens that are infecting our country, one of them being the reparations argument that somehow white Americans owe blacks reparations, and also address issues of critical race theory, cancel culture, and attacks against our First Amendment. So in this book, I really get to the root of where the reparations arguments are coming from and how to debunk them. I take them seriously, but I show that they're fallacious, they're flawed, that white Americans don't owe black reparations. And I go back and show that the foundations of black freedom are actually forged in the crucibles of 1776 and the Declaration of Independence, and that there have been reparative moments in this country towards blacks, starting with the Civil War, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And I also show how Black Lives Matter and other people that we can label as Black nihilists and so on, and Afro-pessimists, are spearheading a movement called the abolitionist movement, which are out to advocate the view that Black emancipation rests on the annihilation and extinction of the white race, and how best to fight against these kinds of divisive movements and ideologies. And so I think there will be a lot of surprises for readers in the book. History lovers will love the book, and those who are lovers of contemporary politics and culture will also find a lot of ammunition in the book to defend them against the divisive rhetoric that is infecting our country.
Fantastic. So first of all, thank you so much for writing the book. I will definitely order mine, and I most likely will have tons of questions on it. But I know today's topic is a little different, not so different, but it's on a different topic. So floor is yours.
Well, this topic, leading in chaos, creating a new manifest destiny for America, is going to be the topic of my next book that I'm actually writing right now. And it's a very large project. And what got me motivated is, again, looking at the time when America did have a manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was a term coined by Robert O'Sullivan, the American journalist, which he used to describe the 19th century doctrine or belief that the expansion of the United States throughout the American continent was both justified and inevitable. And when I think of manifest destiny, I'm not, of course, advocating that we should go around colonizing countries. I'm using it more metaphorically. How can we have a new manifest destiny in which we advance our civilizational values, our foundational values? And why is this necessary? This is necessary because our culture, or a great American civilization, of which I'm a great patriot of, I love this country to death, and it pains me to see the way in which our great republic is being infected by certain pathogens, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's cancel culture, whether it's the Marxist ideology of Black Lives Matter or Antifa, whether it's the massive assaults against our sacred First Amendment. We have become apologists for American exceptionalism. We have become moral masochists in certain ways by accepting all the invectives and the vitriol that is spewed against this great republic of ours. And I think it's time for us to think of what a manifest destiny would look like. If you look at every single civilization, even before the term was coined, whether it be Alexander the Great or his father, Philip of Macedonia of Greece, whether it was Genghis Khan, whether it was William the Conqueror, every civilization has always had a manifest destiny that is advancing an ideology that has legitimized, defended the goals, the philosophy, the fundamental principles that have undergirded its ethos, its agenda in either advancing its way through the world or governing its principles. So I think what we have been doing in this country in fighting some of these idea pathogens that are infecting our country is we've been fighting them piecemeal. And I think in thinking in terms of a manifest destiny, we need to think of a comprehensive, wholesale way of fighting these idea pathogens. So we become wholesalers and not retailers in the fight, in the cultural wars. We're in the midst of a battle. We're in the midst of a cultural war that is destroying this country. And I think we've been going after worker bees. And what we need to do is go after the hives. We're swatting flies and we're swatting bees, and we're not really getting to the hives. So what I want to do in the next 15 or so minutes is just talk about and these are just the outlines. I haven't worked out systematically. It'll take me about a year to write the book. I've been researching it for about 10 years, but it'll take me a while a year to finish the book, is to share with our viewers and our audience just the outlines of what I have in mind. So as I said, what I'd like to do is to break it down into two parts: what we have to eliminate and what we have to cultivate in terms of achieving a manifest destiny. So as I said, I think we have to stop fighting this battle in a piecemeal manner. That is, we have to ask ourselves the question, we have to go back to first principles. What are the foundational principles of America? What are the first principles? What are the uniting principles that unite all of us as Americans in spite of our different conceptions of the good life that we have carved out for ourselves? What are the thin allegiances that we pledge to this republic that can unite us in spite of differences that we have? And I think that when we look at the hives, the destructive hives, we think in terms of national security threats that exist in this country that are producing what I call enemies of the state. And the first hive producing Americophobia. And I think the first hive, and I've talked about this before, that we have to really address is the American universities. The American universities have become national security threats in the sense that they have become indoctrination centers. They're no longer bastions of learning. They have turned into indoctrination centers for radical Marxist left-wing activists who seek to change the political DNA of this country and who are out to destroy the free market enterprise capitalist tenor of this country and to turn it into something else, to turn it into a communist charnel house. And they do it by criminalizing logic, by criminalizing reason, by decolonizing courses, by getting rid of the Western canon, through something called cancel culture, which is really about canceling individual agency by expropriating our agency so that they leave us eviscerated of our dignity, they leave us eviscerated of our capacity to think. And when they have done that, then they start canceling history, which is the codified record of our guiding principles, our guiding ethos, our guiding values that we rely on to save us in times of crises. And I think if you want to look at what cancel culture is all about and what wokeism is all about, you have to look at the university professoriate. These are individuals who are the foot soldiers and the buck privates of a larger body of Marxists, left-wing ideologues who have always hated America, because it's a good country, have always hated the United States of America because it has been a beacon of hope and light, and has always hated the capitalist system because it has raised enormously the standard of living for a significant number of people. So if you want to look at the anti-industrial Marxist communist agenda, if you want to look at the climate changing eco-fascists who really want to bring us back to our primordial state of living in jungle swamps and living on the same level as tsetse flies and man-eating tigers and polar bears, look no further, I think, than university professors. If you want to look at critical race theory, which is a very, very divisive and hate-filled ideology that says that, among other things, I won't get into unpacking critical race theory. I think most of our viewers by now have some idea what it is about, but that claims that America is a white supremacist, systemically racist country, and that if you're the possessor of white skin, that you're an automatic oppressor. Look no further than the intellectuals in our universities. If you look at Black Lives Matter, which has chapters on almost every single university campus, who admit that they're Marxist trained, who admit that their goal is to destroy US banks, break up corporations, attack the nuclear family, look no further than the college professors who are the teachers and the purveyors of these ideas of the individuals and the advocates of Black Lives Matter. So if you want to look at the diversity, equity, and inclusion program or the ideology, which is nothing more than inverse racism, I think you look at the intellectual poison that's coming from the American professoriate. So I think also when you look at ethnic studies coming out of California, where the anti-Judeo-Christian ideology is spreading through K through 12, and you have children in California being turned towards the West to worship Aztec gods and to somehow undermine the Judeo-Christian ethos of this country. You look at the professoriate. So I could go on about how the intellectual poison is really coming from universities, but if we are to achieve a manifest destiny, we have to think about what to eliminate. And I think one of the things that we have to eliminate is the social sciences and humanities as they currently exist by defunding and disbanding universities and insisting from alumni donors and corporations that there are conditionals affixed to the extent to which they fund and allocate funds to these universities, that they either promote intellectual diversity of thought, that is, they have conservative viewpoints existing alongside if left-wing ideologies, or we shut down, we defund the humanities and social sciences. There's no reason why taxpayers, American taxpayers, should be funding their destroyers. We also realize that the purpose of war, in a cultural war, in any kind of war, is not just to defeat your enemy, it's also to inflict generational damage. So I think we have to ensure in some sense that when we win this war, we win it in such a way that future generations cannot wage a large-scale attack on this country in the way that we have seen in the past 5 years, an acceleration of anti-Americanism and Americophobia, that we inflict generational damage. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, just before I move on to what we must cultivate, what we have done in this country. And it's the virtue of political liberalism, American political liberalism, is that we have allowed our enemies a space to attack us. We have not vetted sufficiently those whom we have let into this country. So we must begin the process, I think, of vetting more thoroughly those individuals who are coming in, extremists who are coming into this country and are waging a war. I know when I came to America at the age of 20 as a legal immigrant, I was so grateful because I know that immigration is not a human right. It is not an alienable right. It is a privilege granted to one by a host country. And so I came with no sense of entitlement, let alone coming with a sense of grievance or vengeance. And what we find happening right now is that there are a host of immigrants coming into this country who hate America, who are working, and are not a conspiracy theorist, but are working in alliance with the advocates of these pathogens to destroy this country. So we have got to, and I know this sounds radical, but we've got to begin a process of expelling from this country those individuals who are enemies of the state. And that might include a process of, this is going to sound radical, denaturalization of enemies of the state. Again, because becoming an American citizen is not a natural right or a human right, it's a privilege. So revoking the citizenship of those who are out to destroy this country. It means expelling from the universities those obstreperous children who disrupt free thought and free thinking by staging revolts in the universities. There's no room for this kind of wholesale activism, and firing the administrative bodies who are responsible for this kind of both malarkey and instability that mark the universities today. So I think these are some of the things that we have to think about as part of our new manifest destiny. Now, what must we cultivate? Because I want to get to the questions, so I'm going to move through these very quickly. And let me just debunk one thing. You know, one of the shibboleths or myths that's going around is that, and you heard Vice President, if you can even call her that, Kamala Harris, because she certainly is not functioning as a vice president, saying on Columbus Day that, you know, we live on stolen land. And there was no genocide in this country, and there was no land that was stolen. There was a war for resources, and the Native Americans lost that war. They came in second, right? There was forced assimilation, which was not compatible with extermination. And the 1924 Indigenous Act, which was passed by the United States of America, which granted citizenship to Native Americans in recognition of the contributions they made to World War II, is not compatible with genocide, right? So, and this was signed by Calvin Coolidge. So the idea that this is stolen land when the Native Americans themselves conquered lands several millennia ago is a shibboleth I want to debunk. Okay, so very quickly, I think that we have to cultivate the political emotions of patriotic love of this country in the same way that through critical race theory, the left is cultivating hatred of America by imbuing our young children with the idea that America is a mean-spirited, imperialistic, systematically and systemically racist country. So long as government schools exist, and I am not an advocate of government schools, I would see all of them shut down, but I think they're going to exist for a long time. We have to cultivate the political emotions of patriotic love, along with a new understanding of what civic virtues are. So in the same way that, as I said, the left has cultivated the emotions of hatred, we've got to find a way of cultivating virtues and civic patriotic love of country. Not a kind of mindless love, but a love based on the exceptionalism of this country and explaining to young people what is unprecedented about the American experiment. Why is it that someone such as myself, an immigrant, can come to this country and earn 4, not 1, not 2, but 4 college degrees, including a PhD, and be an author of 5 books? This is unprecedented. You know, America is not based on blood. Citizenship is not based on blood or lineage. It's based on an allegiance to a thin set of values that you adhere to based on the foundational principles of our republic. And we have got to understand that America, in some sense, we've got to create a new mythology as part of our manifest destiny, or ratified a new mythology that this is a chosen country. And the American people, in some sense, are a chosen people, or a different iteration of a chosen people. And if we don't cultivate a new manifest destiny, we have to realize that we are going to be left at the behest of other countries like Iran, like China, like North Korea, that do have their own manifest destiny. And we'll have a clash, a bloody clash of manifest destinies, because even Cuba has a manifest destiny. All Russia has a manifest destiny. Our enemies have manifest destinies. So if we don't develop a manifest destiny, we're going to be left in a vacuum. And we have to be able to lead again. I know some of the paleoconservatives might differ from me in this respect, and I'm not necessarily a neoconservative. I just simply believe that if we don't lead morally and politically, some country is going to take up that slack and lead. Nature abhors a vacuum, as the old saying goes. And so America has to restore her preeminence in this world once more and take up the position. There was a time, I remember when I first came to this country under the auspices or the regime of Ronald Reagan, where America was both admired, loved, and feared. When he said, "Tear down those walls, Mr. Gorbachev," and the Cold War ended, America was admired and feared, and our voices, our political voices, had a moral tenure to them. People listened, people obeyed, and we need to get back to that state where we're not out there nation building necessarily, and we're not out there solving, we're not the world's 911 police, but we are leading by moral example. And when we speak to a country that is committing egregious human rights violations, that they know that there will be penalties and they will obey, because we ourselves are the upholders of human rights. And I just have a few more comments to make. So I will say this, that each American also, and I feel quite strongly about this, very, very passionate about this, each American must feel that he or she can manifest his own personal manifest destiny in this great nation of ours and not feel stifled by political correctness, and of course, by the moral agenda of lesser people. And by lesser people, I mean those on the left, because the audacity and the temerity and the self-righteousness of these people who are advocates of critical race theory and cancel culture, to lecture and hector the rest of society. People who are advocates of trans justice. And I think that all persons, regardless of sexual orientation and gender identification, should be treated with dignity and respect. But when you tend to impose that on the rest of society as a norm that they should adhere to, there's something very crippling and something very, very tyrannical and totalitarian about that. So we, in some sense, must feel empowered to manifest our conception of the good life for ourselves as part of our manifest destiny. I think a lot of Americans feel that they're crippled, they're paralyzed right now, they're afraid to speak, because if they speak and it deviates from received orthodoxy or wisdom, they run the risk of having their lives ruined. They run the risk of having their careers lost. This is a terrible state to exist in. They run the risk of having their Twitter account suspended because they dare to question orthodoxy, or they dare to put forth an ideal that is conservative, or they dare to put forth an idea that upsets those who take themselves to be in control of the narratives. You know, I just want to end with, I watched I think 3 seasons of The Crown, and there was a scene where Queen Mary is telling Queen Elizabeth, the young Queen Elizabeth, about monarchy. And I want to invert that a little bit, or play upon it, and say this about America as we think about a manifest destiny, that America is God's sacred mission to grace and dignify this earth, to give ordinary people an ideal to strive towards. America is an example of nobility and duty to raise people in their humble lives, and that to live as a patriotic America is really a vocational calling from God. So there's so much more that I would want to say, but you know, I'm always respectful of the questions that people might have. And as I said, these are just the outlines that are going to be part of a much more robust and comprehensive formulation of what I hope will be the start of thinking about a new manifest destiny for America, promoting the civilization of values of this country, here and abroad, because I do think America is not a culture. We are a civilization, and a great unprecedented civilization. And we should be suffusing our nation with those values and stop being more masochists, and also suffusing the world, because after all, many people pin their aspirational identities on becoming Americans. I know I certainly did when I left Jamaica at the age of 20. It's not that I lost all of my cultural values. It was that I was able to pin so much of my aspirational identity on becoming an American. I still have my accent. I still love my food from Jamaica. And there's still certain Caribbean values that I hold dear. But my aspirational value was really, really pinned on becoming an American. And I think it's because of America's civilization values that have brought me where I am, that have led me to thinking quite keenly about a manifest destiny for our future. Thank you.
No, thank you. As always, many words of wisdom and interesting points. I wish we did have way more time for you to say more, because I'm interested in the more you want to tell me or tell all of us. But before I start reading the questions, let me just remind everybody, on Zoom, you can use the Q&A box. On Facebook, you can use the comments section with your questions, and I start reading them to Jason. But you mentioned something while you were talking about, we don't really screen these people who come to America, and we need to do a better job. Which, interesting enough, we used to do that, at least when I came here, because it was very shortly after September 11. It was an excessive screening, even when I arrived in America. But I want to ask you this: how can we reverse the damage that's been done already? For example, recently, within the last 2 months, we have literally imported 60,000 Afghan refugees that we don't even know if they are from Afghanistan.
Mhm.
And 50,000 out of 60,000 were just brought over. Some, we don't even know their names. We don't know where they come from. How do we reverse that damage?
Well, we've got to insist that they be vetted, and that they pass the same kind of criteria for admission into the Republic that any asylee or asylum seeker would have to pass. I'm a very compassionate person as an immigrant myself. I'm pro-immigration, legal immigration. I couldn't be otherwise. America has brought me where I am, but I'm not a sentimental person by nature. I think we have got to have a very level-headed approach to this issue, because the infrastructures of this country and the basic, let me just say, the infrastructures of this country are not able to survive an open border or an open-ended admission of individuals whom we know very little about, that our survival as a republic, not just economically, but again, I'm going to go back to our civilizational values that define us as an American republic, are dependent on admitting people who adhere to those thin values. So we've just got to insist. I don't know if it's going to happen with this administration, but we've got to insist that this vetting process takes place, that those who do not meet the criteria are expelled. I mean, I speak of expulsion, and I mean that quite seriously. I'm a university professor, and I think obstreperous children should be expelled from universities or school. I think people who don't meet the criteria, that intelligence, I leave it up to intelligence, and I leave it up to Homeland Security to determine what those criteria are, will have to go. Not everyone can be let in. And part of political liberalism of America in the last couple of years has been a very open-ended one, to let everyone in to the detriment of our republic.
I have always been a huge fan of yours, but from one immigrant to another, I love the fact that you think the way I do. Just don't give up, keep insisting and keep pushing, because the more we give in, or the more we're quiet, the more they win. Okay, let me go ahead and start these questions, because I want to make sure we give as many answers as possible. First question to you from Caitlin. How do we handle the professorate at public universities? Note, I have stopped giving money to my public university.
Well, that's a good thing. Stop funding your destroyers, because it's against your rational self-interest to fund people who are inimical to your values. But also put a great deal, but be more, even though you've stopped giving, also write to your congressman, write to the extent that that will work, or senators or government officials. These are state universities, even private universities. All universities in this country, with the exception of, I think, Hillsdale College and one or two others, are all beneficiaries of public funds, of federal funds. Write to your government officials and put a lot of pressure on them. Write to university administrators and tell them off. Let them know explicitly that you know what's going on. There's a silent majority, Caitlin, that's out there that is sleeping. And you're one of the few that's waking up slowly. But I think the more that the silent majority begins to wake up, withdraw their funding, when it hurts at the pocketbook, people will not necessarily change their values, but they will change their mode of behavior. They will stop punishing, for example, students who hold conservative viewpoints. They will start monitoring the behavior of, I call them, these obstreperous children in our universities who shut down free speech. They will change their behavior, their mode of behavior. We can't change people's conscience, and we probably shouldn't be too interested in changing people's conscience in a free country. But when they apply that conscience in a way that violate our rights and violate our conception of the good life, then it's time to do something. So I think you're perfectly right in demand that these professors get fired, and make a noise about it, because they hate confrontation. They're coward. Most of the professors are cowards, actually.
Fantastic. Okay, here's the next question from Mary. Thank you, Jason. Is there any hope for Europe or the Anglosphere? I hope I pronounced that correctly. They too are suffering from this same self-loathing civilization trajectory.
I think Europe has become a museum piece. I think when you look at Rotterdam, which has more, when you look at the whole Islamification of Europe that is sponsored by the states themselves, there really is very little hope. Europe is more than America. I think the average American is going to be the savior of this republic. But I think Europe is on a mission of complete self-annihilation. I don't recognize Europe anymore. And I'll give an example. The last time I was in Paris, I was surprised to find that there were certain arrondissements in which the imams and the mullahs had made certain arrangements with city mayors and city officials to cordon off certain areas that were gendered. So it's not that even Muslim women, that would be horrible in and of itself. Muslim women couldn't enter these areas. French women could not enter these cafes or these neighborhoods because they were reserved for Islamic men totally. There are parts of Paris that seem more as if one were living in a completely Islamic state than living in France. And why Europe is doing this boggles the mind. But I think Europe is probably over as a culture, and it's left to America as probably the last bastion of the West that can save the West. I think there are exceptions. I think Hungary, as much as I am torn about some of the heavy-handed policies of the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, he is a little heavy-handed, a little bit too authoritarian for my taste, but I think he recognizes that it's going to take something like those policies to save Western civilization. I would not call him a fascist. I would call him a little bit authoritarian, But he realizes that the excesses have been so extreme that it's going to take a kind of extremism. And we see Poland also following in a similar fashion. Putin just came out recently, and I'm not a fan of Russia, but Putin just came out recently and talked about how the Western civilization in the current form of cancel culture is turning against itself, cannibalizing itself, he said. I don't know that Europe can be saved. I know America can be saved. And I think if America can be saved and will be saved, then it can be a beacon of hope for future European generations. But in the immediate sense, I really don't see any hope for Europe.
Well, I might be off here. Do correct me, please. But I feel like the reason there, at least for me, I see more hope for America to be saved, and we can reverse the damages compared to Europe or even Canada, specifically because of our extremely unique constitution. No other country has what we have. And I feel like unless those countries are willing to follow our constitution and change theirs or add our amendments to theirs, I don't know how they would be able to save themselves.
That's right. That's right. We do have a constitution, and we have a particular DNA in our system. We're a pioneer country, and we're a young country. I think people must remember that Europe is millennial, and they're old, and they've taken the experiments in living a little bit too far. But I also think, Annie, that and to the questioner, that there's a kind of hubris involved here. When Angela Merkel said, we're going to take in 200,000 Syrian refugees, and somehow, and when she said, we're not going to vet them, we're just going to take them, and somehow we're going to make it work. There's a kind of arrogance and hubris that the European countries have, in the sense that they think that because they've been, and Germany was never really a colonial empire, but they think that many of them, especially France and the Netherlands, that because they've been empires and they've been managers of the earth for so long, that they're fiduciaries and custodians of the earth, that they can really withstand the onslaughts against Western civilization. So there is a kind of arrogance built into, and Macron, I think, is changing. I think he's seeing where French civilization is dying and disappearing rapidly. But there is a kind of arrogance and hubris that comes along when you have colonized a significant portion of the earth. You've lost the empire, but you haven't lost the sense of hubris or confidence that comes along with thinking, these people are manageable, and we can withstand it. It also comes from a misguided sense of humanitarian, altruistic benevolence that is paternalistic in a way, and it's turning against them. And also a sense of guilt, right? Because they did colonize parts of Africa, and they did colonize North Africa to some extent, to a large extent. And so they think they're righting a wrong. And that way to right this wrong is through radical multiculturalism and identity politics. So there's some sense of guilt associated with Europe and its attempts to accommodate what I would call illiberal individuals who hold illiberal values that are inimical to the Republic of, let's say, France.
That's very true. Very true. Okay. I need to control my urges and keep reading the question from the audience. Jason, can me and you just talk later on the phone so I can ask my question?
Of course.
Okay, here's a question from Michael. I will be keeping an eye out for your book. Now, on that note, getting colleges and the educational system back under control is definitely a bigger step toward ending the hatred toward America that many embrace. How do we create a pro-American culture in entertainment and the media again?
Oh, Michael, that is a fantastic question because the conservatives, the left, knows how to fight both a culture war, a political war, and a culture war. They know how to inundate Hollywood with wokeism and all kinds of anti-American sentiments. I think conservatives are absolutely weak and horrible at fighting the culture war. This is an interesting question. I think this is part of the manifestation that I didn't talk about, but it's going to be part of the book, and how those of us on the conservative side or on the right can really start promoting an American ethos and an American pro-American values in the media. In the division of labor, it just cannot be done on the political level by electing conservative government officials. We have got to infiltrate the entertainment industry. We've got to infiltrate the comedy. Comedy is important. We see Dave Chappelle, of course, getting a lot of pushback, but standing up against the woke establishment. Conservatives tend to be very high-minded and serious in some respect, and think mistakenly that the battle is to be won and can only be fought on the political level. It's going to be very difficult because Hollywood is really controlled by the left and by people who are not too fond of America. So I will say that we have to create an environment in which, and I think there's a hunger for it, media that we fund, conservatives fund, and conservatives have a lot of money, but I have found in my own case that they are slow to fund projects. They've got to fund media establishments. By that I mean writers and actors, theater people, comedy people who want to go out into the world and promote this kind of pro-American values, open up their pocketbooks and fund these endeavors in the same way that the left is so good at funding projects. I mean, you just look at Ibram Kendi, right? This professor who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is really not how to be an anti-racist, who just got the MacArthur Genius Award, for Christ's sake, who got thousands of dollars. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the biggest hater of America, who got the National Book Award and is paid $20,000 for every speech that he makes. Conservatives have got to band together and I think do the same thing in terms of on the cultural level, and not be so myopic in their view that the only way to change culture is on the political level. It has got to be changed on the cultural level also. And so we have to implore, I'm an educator, so I have to do what I do on the education level. But people who work in the tech industry, people who are philanthropists, conservative philanthropists, have got to seek out those individuals who are dying to work in the culture sphere and fund those projects.
I would 100% agree. And on that note, if you don't mind, there is a question here that is for me from our Facebook audience, which is kind of related to what you were answering. Liz is asking, I know Zanny Cyrus, why can't you try to obtain a segment on Newsmax? I think it's time more viewers know you and the guests you have on your show. The audience is ready. The time is now. Liz, the reason would be, as Jason has started his answer with, conservatives are not good at fighting cancel culture. It's not that I haven't tried. It's that people like me seem to have no place in conservative, big mainstream or media because we're too blunt and we don't follow the nice, polite narrative. I will never go on camera and say the radical Islamic regime of Iran. I will say the Islamic regime of Iran. The censorship is still within us, within the conservative. We self-censor ourselves because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So That would be the reason, at least for me. I have tried. It wasn't for lack of trying. I just have not been accepted by most of, not just Newsmax, also other places. That's for the reason I say get behind David Horowitz Freedom Center, because, well, look, both me and Jason are sitting here talking without being censored. Okay, that one. You want to add anything to that, Jason, or should we go to the next question?
I just think you're right, Annie. I mean, I find that I still have difficulty getting on a lot of conservative podcasts because there's still a sense of politeness and nicety, that niceness. You have to play nice, whereas the left doesn't play nice, right? You watch MSNBC and Rachel Maddow, and you watch Don Lemon on CNN, and these people just rip. But for some reason, on these conservative podcasts, you're expected to somehow still, play nice, and you can get look at. I think it's fair to say that Jamie sent an email that he got canceled on his Twitter account, got canceled because he made some innocent remark. I find that conservatives censor other conservatives in a way that the left will not censor their own kind.
Agreed. Okay, here we go. Next question from Stephen Mick says, my sense is that all of these problems come from big government. Mandates in the schools, etc., which push toxic ideologies. Would you agree that the only fix is to shrink big government, and is it even possible anymore?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have to shrink the size of the government, and we have to, and there is no doubt that this bloated, totalitarian, expansive government that is encroaching on people's lives can only gain their traction by the endorsement of the people. But I think it's, both the conservatives and the people on the left, in some sense, are responsible for an expanded government. I mean, I am not an enemy of George W. Bush. In fact, I like him very much. But, look at the number of regulations that came out under his administration. And so I agree completely with George, that we have got to shrink the government. I think, for example, if I were in government, I would eliminate completely the Department of Education. We need to shut these government schools down, and I would abolish the IRS, for example. I would not tax people on the income that they would use to send their children to school, to private schools, or be an advocate of tax vouchers or charter schools. So the money that people would send to private schools, they should not be taxed on. So yes, it's big government. It's expansive government that has grown in geometric proportion, disproportionately, and people don't seem to have a problem. Both conservatives and, well, certainly the leftists don't, because that's their agenda. But I'm appalled at the extent to which conservatives don't realize the extent to which expansive government lead precisely to these toxic ideologies that are permeating K through 12, permeating corporate culture, and permeating our university system. Agreed.
Okay, I will try to squeeze one more question in there if possible from Madeline. She said, my 16-year-old granddaughter is reading the new Jim Crow in her AP English class at a private high school here in South Florida, where the unit for the year is social justice. I am planning to give her your book, We Have Overcome, as an antidote. As her mother is deceased, it's her grandmother, I felt that I have limited abilities to act. I have a close relationship with her. I plan to get the book from the library so I can discuss it with her, but what else can I do?
Well, one thing that you can do is to not make her feel guilty and ashamed for being a proud, patriotic American. This goes back to what I call the moral masochism that many of us feel about proclaiming or love of country or pride in being Americans. Teach her to claim the moral high ground. Teach her to stand up and defend American exceptionalism, not as some kind of mindless act, but educate her on what makes America an exceptional country, what makes America the country that we have to go to great lengths to keep people from coming in. A lot of people want to come to America. If America was such an evil, bad country, why do millions and millions of people stake their lives, risk drowning, risk death, trying to come here? Preach the goodness of America. It's not a perfect country, but it's a country that is always evolving, that is always seeking to correct its flaws, and imbue in her a sense of pride and love of country, and an embracement of nationalism in a good sense, not that kind of ugly cultural nationalism that would seek to exclude people on the basis of race, but nationalism that unites us all in shared common values. And if she's inoculated against the ugliness that the far left preaches, she will be a very proud, strong young woman in whom no one will be able to induce shame and guilt for being proud. I think part of what happens with a lot of young people is that they're afraid of being ostracized. So I think one other piece of advice you've got to disseminate to her is that there is a sense of loneliness that is going to come from standing up for the greatness of this country, but encourage her to seek out like-minded individuals who love America. Whether there are liberals also who love this country. I don't mean to paint everyone on the left as a demonic monster, although increasingly the Liberal Party is really becoming indistinguishable from the far left. But there are people who are liberals who love America, and there are conservatives who love I think most conservatives love America. To seek out those individuals who love this country and to seek alliances and affinity with them, whether it's joining a book, encourage her to start her own book club, for example. That's one thing. Books that she likes, to start her own book club, to start her own organization, little organization like a book club or a film club that's a very pro-American film. Young people love to watch film, to gather friends at her house, that she doesn't feel lonely, that she can start building, empower her to build her own community, that she has a voice, and that voice can be an attractant. It can attract other people. So, encourage her not to sit there passively waiting for others to accept her, but encourage her to build her own community in very small ways that are dependent on her agency.
Brilliant ideas. I might just steal some of those suggestions and use them on my own live feed. Jason, tell our audience where they can go again to get your book. Also, where do they go to follow your work?
So the book is on Amazon. The book just came out yesterday. All my books are on there. And I think a few independent bookstores are carrying it. I don't think that'll last too long. The last time they took them down very quickly. Barnes & Noble, but definitely the best place to go is Amazon. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jason D Hill 6 and on Facebook at Dr. Jason D Hill 1913 on Facebook. Anyone who wants to be my Facebook friend, I just always accept them because if they're an admirer of my work. And I'm on Twitter, and Amazon has the books at a radically discounted rate. So, which is bad for me for royalties, but it's okay. I'm happy to get the ideas out there. It's not about the money, it's about disseminating the right ideas and the truth.
Very true. Jason Hill, as always, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom and all the information. I personally look forward to the next book that you're just getting started on. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Annie.
Absolutely. And to our lovely audience who stayed with us until now, we appreciate you very much. And I just want to remind you that these webinars are brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang for free. So if you'd like us to continue, go to frontpagemag.com and make 100% tax deductible in support of these webinars. With that being said, please stay safe and goodbye.